The first time Ethan saw the name of the town, it was almost by accident. He had been scrolling through an old topographical map online, one of those scanned archives people uploaded for cartography enthusiasts. Ethan wasn't a historian or a geographer, just a curious man with too much time on his hands since his freelance work slowed. He had a fascination with small forgotten places, ghost towns, and half-built communities that never made it into the mainstream. There is something sad and magnetic about them, places erased not by catastrophe, but by time and indifference. The map was dated from the early 1970s, a faded grid of back roads, elevation lines, and rural routes that cut across forest and farmland. In the corner, just off a winding road that should have led to nothing, a name caught his eye. Darrenville. He zoomed in, expecting to find some notes, maybe a symbol for a church or a county marker. But no, just the small, neat print of the town's name, a cluster of streets indicated by faint lines. Darrenville. Ethan frowned. He lived not too far from where that should have been, about an hour's drive. He knew most towns in that county, Harrow Creek, Ashton, Larkspur. But Darrenville? He'd never heard of it. Curiosity tugged at him. He pulled up a current digital map and searched the same area. Nothing. The road bent through fields and woods, but no settlement was marked there. Not Darrenville, not anything. For the rest of the night, Ethan fell down a rabbit hole. He Googled Darrenville. No results except a couple of dead links and one blurry scan of an old real estate pamphlet. He dug through archived newspapers. Nothing. It was as though the town existed only on that single map, a ghost of ink and cartographer's pen. And yet the lines were too deliberate. It wasn't a misprint. Someone had put it there. By morning, he had convinced himself he needed to see for himself. The drive took him through stretches of forest where cell service dropped out. The summer air was heavy, clouds, threatening rain. Ethan followed the route carefully, comparing his GPS to the printed scan of the old map. Every turn lined up, and then, as the road narrowed and dipped between trees, he saw it. A sign, rusted, bent slightly to one side, almost hidden in the overgrowth. Welcome to Darrenville. His stomach tightened. He slowed, staring. The letters were faded but legible, flaking white on green metal. Beyond the sign, the road widened slightly, and houses appeared. Not ruins, houses. Small, neatly kept bungalows with shutters, porches, flower beds. Cars and driveways. Laundry lines strung in backyards. People. Ethan pulled over, heart racing. The map hadn't lied. The town was here. Alive. He got out his car, gravel crunching underfoot. A woman across the street watered her garden, giving him a brief glance before returning to her flowers. Kids rode bicycles, their laughter carrying down the street. It was so ordinary, so alive, it made his head spin. How could an entire town like this not exist on any modern map? He approached the woman cautiously. "Excuse me," he said. Sorry to bother you. This town, Darrenville, right?" The woman's hand froze on the hose. Slowly, she looked up at him. Her expression was polite, but her eyes were sharp in a way that made his throat tighten. "This town?" she repeated. "Yes," Ethan said, gesturing at the houses, the street. "Darrenville? That's what the old sign said." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "There's no town here by that name." Ethan blinked. "But the sign must be old," she said. She turned back to her garden, spraying the soil. "This is just a county road. No town here." Ethan stood frozen. The children laughed as they pedaled past, their voices oddly hollow as they echoed against the houses. He forced a laugh. "Right, sure. Sorry for bothering you." Back in his car, he pulled up his phone again, though there was no service. The GPS still showed him on an empty stretch of road. No markers, just forest. But he could see with his own eyes the houses, the people, the sidewalks. He drove deeper into Darrenville. The streets wound in neat blocks, lined with street lamps that looked recently painted. Shops stood on the corner, a hardware store, a diner with a neon sign, a pharmacy with a striped awning. All of them looked like they had been lifted from the 1950s. The diner's sign buzzed faintly, spelling out EATS. Inside, people sat at booths, eating, drinking coffee. Ordinary. Ethan parked and stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling. The smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air. He slid into a booth. A waitress approached, pad in hand. Her uniform was crisp, pale blue, with a name tag that simply said June. She smiled, practiced, and professional. "What can I get you?" Ethan licked his lips. "Just coffee, thanks." As she poured, he cleared his throat. "So this town, Darrenville, right?" Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes flicked to his. "What town?" He blinked. "This town." The sign said, "There's no town here," she said softly, firmly. "Just road. Just forest." The words sank into him like cold water. "But I can see it," he whispered. June set the coffee down with a steady hand. "Sometimes people come here by mistake," she said quietly, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "My advice? Don't stay long. Don't ask questions. Just leave." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Why? What happens if?" Her smile tightened. She straightened, her voice now loud enough for others to hear. "Enjoy your coffee." Then she walked away. Ethan sat there, heart hammering, trying not to look around too obviously. The other customers were eating, chatting, but he noticed how their eyes flicked toward him when they thought he wasn't looking, as if they were waiting. He drank the coffee quickly, left cash on the table, and hurried outside. The air felt heavier now. The houses looked the same, but somehow off. The paint too bright, the lawns too perfectly trimmed, the people too still when they paused. He drove until he reached the other end of town, where another rusted sign stood, now leaving Darrenville. The road continued into forest. When he glanced in the rearview mirror, the town looked normal, alive, real. But when he drove another mile and stopped, turning back, the road was empty. Just forest. No houses. No sign. Nothing. Ethan's breath caught. He got out of the car, stumbling into the trees. He should have been standing at the edge of the neighborhood, but all that stretched before him was unbroken woodland. He turned in a slow circle. No road, no houses, only silence. But when he closed his eyes, he swore he could still hear the faint sound of children's laughter. That night, back home, Ethan sat at his desk, the coffee taste still lingering. He pulled up the old map again. Darrenville was still there, inked neatly, undeniable. He checked another scanned version of the same year's atlas. This time, the name wasn't there. One map had the town. The others did not. He rubbed his eyes. Was it a hallucination? A trick of stress? Lack of sleep? His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have come here." Ethan's stomach dropped. His hands shook as he typed back. "Who is this?" No response. He stared at his reflection in the dark screen, his own pale face staring back, eyes wide. Behind him, in the reflection of the window, for just an instant, he thought he saw the faint outline of a diner. Neon buzzing. Ethan barely slept that night. Every time he shut his eyes, he saw the town again, neat streets curling into impossible woods, children circling on bikes, the smile of the waitress who wouldn't say its name. The text message glowed in his mind like an afterimage. "You shouldn't have come here." By morning, he convinced himself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe a historical recreation village, some strange county project. But that didn't explain the map or why it appeared only once in decades of atlases. He needed proof. Before leaving his apartment, Ethan packed his camera, an old Polaroid he trusted more than his phone. Something about analog film seemed harder to tamper with, harder to explain away. The drive was easier the second time. He felt his nerves settle into determination. If Darrenville was real, he'd capture it. If it was some trick of memory or stress, then maybe the photos would show nothing, and he could stop obsessing. He reached the same curve of road where the first sign had appeared. At first, nothing, just forest. His chest tightened. But as he rounded another bend, there was again, exactly as before, the green, rusted sign. "Welcome to Darrenville." He parked, snapped a photo, and waited for the Polaroid to develop. His hands shook as the image darkened. When the lines appeared, his breath caught. The sign was there, clear, solid. Relief and terror tangled in his chest. At least he wasn't imagining it. He drove slowly through the streets again. This time, he noticed small details he had missed. The The way the people smiled a moment too late when greeting one another. How no one seemed in a hurry. The way the air hung still, as though the town lived in a bubble outside of weather itself. He parked near the diner again. He wasn't planning to go inside. Not after June's warning, but he needed another picture. He lifted the camera, framed the glowing neon EATS sign, and pressed the shutter. As the photo developed, he glanced at the diner windows. June was there, staring out at him. No smile this time, just watching. He lowered the photo, and his chest went cold. The Polaroid was blank. No dainit, no sign, just the road. He shook it, thinking maybe it hadn't developed properly. But the glossy square remained empty. He raised the camera again, pointed at a row of houses. Click! As the film developed, he felt the hair rise on his arms. The picture showed nothing but trees. Dense forest where the houses had stood. Ethan's breathing quickened. He turned the camera toward the kids riding past on bikes. He hated himself for doing it, but he needed to know. Click! The film emerged. As the white haze faded, he saw the road again, empty. No children. No bikes. He stuffed the photos into his bag, heart hammering. His phone buzzed in his pocket. When he pulled it out, the screen lit with another unknown message. Stop taking pictures. His hands went clammy. He looked around, but no one was holding a phone. The children were gone. The streets looked emptier than before. He bolted into his car, fumbling with the keys. The moment the engine started, he drove fast, ignoring the speed limit signs. He didn't stop until he reached the now leaving Darrenville marker. He looked in the rearview mirror. The town shimmered there, perfectly intact. But when he drove a mile farther and pulled over, stepping out, the forest had swallowed everything again. The photos in his bag felt like burning coal. He pulled one out, staring at the blank road where the diner should have been. He couldn't tell if the emptiness or the town itself scared him more. Back home, Ethan spread the Polaroids on his desk. Every single one was blank forest. No structures, no people, no signs. But he remembered what he saw. He remembered June's voice, warning him. He remembered the kids' laughter echoing. He couldn't let it go. The next day, he reached out to local historians online, slipping Darrenville's name casually into conversation. Most responses were quick dismissals. Never heard of it. Maybe a misprint. One man, however, messaged him privately. The man's profile photo showed an older face, gray hair, and wire-frame glasses. His message was short. Don't ask about Darrenville in public. If you want to know, meet me in person. Tomorrow, noon, at Miller's Park. Ethan hesitated. The request was strange, almost theatrical. But what choice did he have? The next day, Miller's Park was mostly empty. The sky hung heavy with clouds, the playground swings creaking in the breeze. Ethan sat on a bench, clutching the Polaroids in an envelope. At exactly noon, the man arrived. He wore a worn coat and carried a cane. His eyes darted nervously as he sat beside Ethan. You saw it, didn't you? The man said without greeting. Ethan swallowed. You know about Darrenville? The man's lips pressed thin. I've been there. Once. Years ago. Then why? Why does no one admit it exists? The man looked to the ground. Because it isn't supposed to. Ethan frowned. That doesn't make sense. A whole town. The man leaned closer. I don't know if it's a town, or something wearing the shape of one, but it shouldn't be there. It only shows itself sometimes, only on certain maps. And anyone who stays too long, he stopped. His eyes flicked around the park as though checking for listeners. Ethan's voice was a whisper. What happens? The man's hand trembled on his cane. They disappear. The town keeps them. And afterward, no one remembers they existed. Not family, not friends. Like they were erased. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. That's impossible. The man gave a hollow smile. You think so? Try asking around about me next week. See if anyone remembers we met. Ethan stared. Why are you telling me this? Because you're already marked, the man said flatly. You went inside. They know you. It's only a matter of time before it pulls you back. Ethan's throat tightened. How do I stop it? The man looked at him with tired eyes. Don't go back. He stood abruptly, as though afraid to linger. Without another word, he walked away, cane tapping against the pavement. Ethan sat frozen, clutching the envelope of photos. His mind reeled. Was the man crazy? Or had he just confirmed everything Ethan feared? That night, he tried to distract himself, but unease lingered. Every shadow in his apartment looked sharper, every reflection deeper. When he passed the mirror in his hallway, he swore for an instant the angle behind his reflection wasn't quite the same as his apartment. He avoided looking too long. Just before midnight, another message buzzed his phone. "You belong here now." Ethan's hand shook so badly he nearly dropped it. He didn't reply. He turned off the phone, left it on the counter. But as he lay in bed, he felt it vibrating over and over, unseen messages flooding in. Sleep came fitfully. In his dreams, he stood in Darrenville's streets, the diner glowing, the houses too still. The townspeople smiled at him in unison, their eyes empty. When he woke, the Polaroids were scattered across the floor. He hadn't touched them, and one of them had changed. Where before it showed only forest, now faintly visible in the faded image was a single shape. Ethan himself, standing on the empty road, staring back at the camera. Ethan barely left his apartment the next day. The Polaroid with his image gnawed at his mind, the way his own figure had stared back from the photograph like a ghost of himself, trapped in the place he swore he had left behind. He kept it tucked in the envelope, but every few minutes he found himself pulling it out again, staring until nausea built in his stomach. It was impossible. He had taken that photo. He knew he had not been standing in the frame. And yet there he was, a smaller, faded version of himself, on the empty road leading through Darrenville. His phone stayed off. He couldn't face more messages. He thought about throwing in the trash, but the thought filled him with dread, as though something would follow even without the device. That night, while trying to distract himself, he opened the atlas again. His fingers trembled as he flipped to the page. There it was. Darrenville, neatly labeled, nestled between familiar towns like it had always been there. But something was different. This time, faint gray lines spidered outward from Darrenville's boundary, as though new streets were drawn in pencil. Streets that hadn't been on the map before. And one of them bore a name that made Ethan's mouth go dry. Miller's Lane. The same name as the park where he'd met the old man. His stomach clenched. The map wasn't just documenting Darrenville. It was spreading, extending itself into the world he knew. That night, he dreamed again. Not just a glimpse, but hours wandering the town. In the dream, he walked past houses that all looked alike, each window glowing faintly. Curtains shifted as he passed. The diner was open, June waiting inside, but she didn't wave this time. She just watched him, expressionless. At one point, he found himself at the diner counter. He didn't remember entering, but suddenly he was sitting there, June sliding a cup of coffee toward him. "You shouldn't fight it," she said softly. His voice came out hoarse. "Fight what?" Her eyes flicked to the window, where the empty streets stretched into fog. The remembering. He looked down. The coffee was black, but when he raised the cup, the liquid reflected his face. Except it wasn't his own expression. It smiled at him. He jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The clock read 3:17 a.m. His apartment felt wrong, as though the dimensions had shifted. He stepped into the hallway and stopped cold. The mirror. It was larger than before. He swore it had been a narrow rectangle. Now it was wide, a pane of glass stretching nearly to the floor. His reflection stood there, pale, exhausted, but different. The angle of the room behind the reflection wasn't quite his apartment. The light bulb hung lower, the wallpaper darker. He stumbled back, heart racing. His reflection didn't move. And then, slowly it smiled. Ethan grabbed a sheet from his bed and threw it over the glass, covering it completely. He slept with the lights on, his nerves shredded. The next day, he tried to reach the old man again, but the email address was gone. His online profile had vanished completely. When Ethan asked around the same forums, no one remembered the man at all. Some even denied anyone by that name had ever posted. The warning echoed in Ethan's mind. "Try asking around about me next week." The man had been right. He decided he had to leave town. If Darrenville was bleeding into his life, if it was pulling at him, maybe distance could help. He packed hastily, shoving clothes into a suitcase. He booked a motel 2 hours away. But as he drove, the gnawing dread never lifted. The road felt wrong, bending too far in places, trees pressing closer. When he pulled off at a gas station, he glanced at the rack of free tourist maps by the counter. He froze. Each map had a bright red circle, drawn in marker, around a spot deep in the woods. Beside it, bold letters read, "Visit Historic Darrenville." His pulse pounded. He grabbed one, shoving it in his jacket. The cashier, a tired-looking man with thinning hair, glanced at him. Heading there, Ethan stiffened. "You know about it?" The man frowned. "About what?" Ethan held up the map. The man blinked. "That one's blank, sir. You okay?" Ethan looked down. His heart lurched. The paper in his hands showed nothing but forest where Darrenville had been circled. No town, no roads. He stuffed it back, muttered something, and hurried out. That night, at the motel, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He locked the door, drew the curtains. When he checked the Polaroids again, another had changed. Now 2 images showed him. In one, he stood on the diner steps, looking over his shoulder. In the other, he sat inside at the counter, June at his side. He dropped the photos while rising in his throat. He had never taken those shots. He had never gone back. Unless his phone, though powered off, buzzed on the nightstand. He stared at it. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Finally, with trembling hands, he turned it over. The screen glowed, though he hadn't pressed anything. One new message. "Stop running. You're already here." The motel room seemed to tilt, shadows stretching longer. His chest tightened, panic clawing. He stumbled to the bathroom to splash his face. But when he looked up at the mirror, the reflection wasn't the motel. It was the diner. June stood behind him, smiling gently. The light bulb flickered, and for an instant, Ethan swore he smelled coffee brewing. Ethan didn't leave the motel room the next day. He couldn't. Every time he glanced toward the window, he swore the curtains bulged inward, as if the night air itself was leaning closer to listen. He tried to read, tried to distract himself, but his eyes returned again and again to the Polaroids scattered across the nightstand. There were 6 now. The original blank forest, the diner steps, the counter with June, and 3 more, added without his consent. One showed him walking down a street lined with identical houses. Another captured him sitting on a bench in a small square, surrounded by smiling strangers. The last made his stomach churn. The diner again, but this time he wasn't alone. June sat across from him, smiling faintly. And beside her, blurred but unmistakable, was the old man he had met at Miller's Park. The one everyone insisted didn't exist anymore. His hands trembled as he gathered the photos, shoving them back into the envelope. He couldn't destroy them. Some instinct screamed that burning them or tearing them up would only bind him tighter. But keeping them felt like carrying pieces of his own coffin. The motel clock ticked past midnight. Ethan hadn't turned off the lights. His eyelids dragged heavy, but fear kept him from letting go completely. At some point, exhaustion won. He woke with his head on the desk, Polaroids spread before him again. His heart thudded in his throat. He hadn't touched them, but they had rearranged themselves. The 6 photos now formed a neat rectangle, like windows looking into the same place. And beyond their glossy surfaces, Darrenville stretched, continuous, as if the photographs stitched together a single view. He shoved them away, but his phone buzzed again. He hadn't turned it on. The screen flickered with another message. "Come home." The letters pulsed softly, as though alive. Ethan clutched his suitcase. He didn't care where he went anymore. He just had to move. Distance, speed, something had to work. He grabbed his keys, bolted to the car, and tore out of the motel parking lot. The highway stretched empty, trees flashing past like sentinels. He drove until his eyes burned, until his knuckles ached from gripping the wheel. Then, through the darkness, his headlights caught it. A green, rusted sign. "Welcome to Darrenville." He slammed the brakes, skidding onto the shoulder. His stomach lurched. This wasn't possible. He had been driving in the opposite direction, hours away. Yet there it was. The sign, the town, the same diner lights glowing warm in the distance. Ethan's chest caved in. He floored the gas, swerving around the sign, refusing to look. The town blurred past in his peripheral vision. He didn't stop until the fuel gauge blinked red. When he finally pulled into a rest stop, Dawn was breaking. He stumbled out, legs shaky, and staggered inside. A tired woman behind the counter gave him a sympathetic smile. "Rough night?" she asked. Ethan nodded numbly. "Just long drive." He grabbed a bottle of water, handed her cash, and left. But as he walked past the bulletin board near the door, something caught his eye. A flyer, yellowed at the edges, stapled crooked. "Missing person, Ethan Cole." His own face stared back at him. The photo was weeks old. He ripped the flyer down, heart hammering, and rushed his car. His hand shook so badly he could barely start the engine. When he finally did, he noticed something in the passenger seat. Another Polaroid. This one showed the missing flyer itself, still pinned to the bulletin board. His breath came ragged. He hurled the picture onto the floor, stomped the gas pedal, and drove. By the time he reached the outskirts of another city, he was half delirious. He checked into a cheap hotel under a fake name, hands trembling as he filled the form. He didn't care if it was paranoia. He couldn't let the town trace him. That night, he sat in the dark, the Polaroid envelope on the bed. He knew he should throw it away, but it felt like a leash around his wrist. At 3 a.m, the TV in his room flickered on by itself. The screen glowed static for a moment, then shifted. Ethan froze. It was the diner. June stood behind the counter, polishing a glass. She looked up, her eyes meeting his through the television. "Why do you keep running?" she asked. Ethan's chest seized. "Leave me alone," he whispered, though no one was there to hear him. June tilted her head. "You don't understand. You never left." The static deepened, swallowing her words. Ethan lunged forward and yanked the plug from the wall. The screen went black. But when he turned, his reflection in the darkened window wasn't his. It was himself, sitting at the diner counter, June at his side. He stumbled back, clutching his head. "I'm losing my mind. I'm losing everything." By dawn, his decision was made. He couldn't keep running. The town was spreading, pulling at him no matter where he went. Maybe if he confronted it, if he understood, it would release him. He left the hotel, maps spread across his passenger seat, tracing the roads back to where Darrenville waited. The town welcomed him silently. The streets lay still, the neon diner sign humming faintly. He parked, clutching his camera, though he already knew no photo would show the truth. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee and sugar, warm and inviting. Too inviting. June looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. "You came back," she said softly. "I never left, did I?" His voice cracked. She tilted her head. "You're beginning to understand." Ethan slid into a booth, the vinyl cool against his skin. "Why me? Why does it want me?" June's smile was sad. "It doesn't choose. It just remembers. Once you see it, you belong to it. You can leave, but only for a while." His throat tightened. "And the others? The ones who disappear." Her eyes flicked to the window. "They didn't disappear. They're here. They always were." Ethan's stomach churned. "I don't want this." June's gaze softened, almost pitying. "One has nothing to do with it." From the corner of his eye, Ethan noticed a man sitting at the counter. His heart lurched. The old man. Alive. He turned, desperate. "You said you were gone. That people wouldn't remember you." The old man gave a hollow smile. They don't. But the town does. It keeps us." Ethan's skin crawled. He wanted to run, but his body felt heavy, as though the air itself pressed him down. June poured him a cup of coffee, sliding it across the table. "Drink," she said gently. "You'll feel better." He stared at the dark surface. For a moment, it reflected nothing. Then, slowly, his own face appeared, but older. Tired, like he had been here for years. The smell of coffee wrapped around him. His vision swam, and in that dizzying moment, he realized he couldn't remember how long he had been sitting there. Minutes? Hours? Days? The diner hummed softly. The town outside lay still, and Ethan wondered if he had ever left at all. Ethan tried to stand, but the diner booth seemed to grip him. His legs felt heavy, his arms sluggish, as though the air itself had thickened into syrup. June leaned casually against the counter, watching him with quiet patience, while the old man stirred sugar into his coffee with a rattling spoon. The sound scraped through Ethan's skull. "I'm not staying," Ethan forced out. "I'm not like you." The old man chuckled dryly. "You think that matters?" The moment you saw the town, you were already claimed. Ethan's throat tightened. I didn't choose this. No one does, June said softly. But that doesn't mean it isn't true. The window beside Ethan shimmered faintly. His gaze snapped to it. The reflection wasn't the diner interior. It was his motel room. The bed was unmade, the desk lamp still glowing. And on the bed, slumped forward, was Ethan himself, Polaroids scattered across his lap. His chest clenched. That's not real. It's as real as you want it to be, June replied. But the longer you fight, the worse it becomes. You'll fracture. You'll see yourself in places you never were. You'll forget which version of you is true. Ethan's breathing quickened. The old man sipped his coffee, watching with weary eyes. It's easier if you stop resisting, the man murmured. Ethan forced himself upright, shoving back from the booth. His legs trembled but obeyed. He stumbled to the door, wrenching it open. The street outside stretched empty, but not silent. The faint hum of unseen machinery pulsed through the air, like the low drone of a generator. He staggered forward, the hairs on his neck rising. The town looked wrong. Every house on the block had the same curtains, drawn just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness. The lampposts glowed faint yellow, but no moths fluttered near them. The air smelled faintly of dust and rain, though the pavement was dry. He broke into a run. The streets twisted, looping back on themselves. He turned left, right, straight, but the diner's neon sign appeared no matter where he went, glowing faintly through the fog. He felt trapped inside a maze that shifted behind him, herding him closer. Finally, he found himself in the town square. Benches lined the cobblestones. A fountain stood in the center, but the water wasn't moving. It hung midair, frozen like glass. A few figures sat on the benches. They turned their heads as he approached. His blood turned cold. There were people he knew. A woman from his apartment building, knitting calmly, though she hadn't looked up when he passed her earlier this week. A man from the bookstore near his street, reading a paper that never turned pages. Even his old history teacher, gazing with hollow eyes. They all smiled faintly. "You remember us," they said in unison, voices blending into one. Ethan staggered back. "No, you saw us. That's enough. You know where we are." Their faces blurred, like Polaroids shaken too hard, details smudging until they looked like pale imitations of memory. Ethan turned and ran again. His lungs burned, but the streets folded endlessly, looping him through alleys and squares until he collapsed against a wall, gasping. Above him, a street sign read, Miller's Lane. His vision swam. He was back where it began. A hand touched his shoulder. He spun around. It was June. Her face softened with sympathy, but her eyes gleamed with something unreadable. "You're breaking apart," she said quietly. "Pieces of you are already here. The rest will follow soon." He shook his head violently. No, I still know who I am. I still know what's real." Her expression wavered. "Do you? Tell me where you are right now." "I'm in," he stopped. The word caught in his throat. Motel? Diner? His apartment? Darrenville? Each answer felt right. Each answer felt wrong. June stepped closer. "You can't hold both. Either you accept Darrenville, or you'll shatter between them." "I don't want either," Ethan whispered. The old man appeared in the fog, approaching slowly. His footsteps echoed too loudly against the silent street. "You don't get a choice," he said. Ethan staggered back. His mind screamed, "If I can't run, if I can't choose, then I'll fight." He fumbled for his camera, raising it with shaking hands. He snapped a photo of June, the flash bursting bright. For an instant, the world cracked. The image printed, sliding out. In the photo, June wasn't smiling. Her face blurred, her mouth open in a silent scream. When Ethan looked up, June wavered like heat haze. Her eyes darkened, lips curling. "You shouldn't have done that," she hissed. The fog closed in around him, thick and suffocating. His chest heaved, his head pounding. The street, the square, the figures, all distorted, bending inward as though the town itself was collapsing on him. His last thought before everything went black was the sound of the Polaroid ejecting another picture. When he woke, he was back in his apartment. The envelope of photos lay open on the desk. He sat rigid in his chair, heart racing. The city noise drifted faintly through the window. It was morning. For a moment, hope flickered. Maybe it had been a nightmare. Then he saw the new Polaroid at the top of the pile. It showed him sitting at his apartment desk, staring down at a pile of Polaroids. And in the reflection of the window behind him, the diner glowed faintly. Ethan didn't move for hours. He sat rigid in the desk chair of his apartment, staring at the stack of Polaroids spread before him. His hands wouldn't stop trembling, though the room was warm. Outside, traffic rumbled, people laughed faintly on the sidewalk below. Life pulsed normally. But the photos insisted otherwise. Every time he blinked, there seemed to be another one at the top of the pile. The diner, the town square, the fountain frozen mid-splash, June's hollow eyes, the old man's weary smile, and worse, images of himself, not where he remembered being, sitting in the diner, sipping coffee, walking the quiet streets of Darrenville, his shadow long and warped, standing in front of a house whose windows were covered by identical curtains. He whispered to himself, "I'm here. I'm home. I'm not there. I'm not." But the words felt thin, like paper stretched too far. When the clock ticked midnight, his phone buzzed. A new message appeared. "You can't fight both." Ditchide. His chest tightened. His throat felt raw, as though he'd been screaming for hours he didn't remember. He staggered to his feet, clutching the phone. "Decide what?" He hissed into the empty room. The reflection in the window shifted. He wasn't in his apartment anymore. He was in the diner, sitting at the counter. June stood behind him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. He turned sharply, but his apartment was still around him. The reflection remained. "Stop," he whispered. "Please stop." June's voice drifted from the glass, muffled yet clear. "It's not stopping. You're splitting. If you don't choose, you'll tear apart. Do you want to exist in fragments, scattered between places? Or will you let one version of you remain whole?" His pulse thundered. "I don't want to disappear." Her expression softened. "Then don't. Stay." The old man appeared beside her in the reflection. His lined face looked tired but calm. "It isn't death," he said. "It's memory. You become part of something that can't be erased. People outside may forget you, but the town never will. Isn't that better than fading away?" Ethan backed away from the window, his heart hammering. His heel hit the desk, knocking the Polaroids onto the floor. They spilled outward, sliding like spilled cards until they covered every inch of the carpet. And then the photographs began to move. The frozen images shifted, flickered, blurred into motion like tiny screens. He saw himself walking, sitting, smiling at June, speaking to townsfolk. He saw his own face in places he had never been. The photos whispered, soft voices rising from glossy surfaces. "Stay, stay, stay." He clamped his hands over his ears, but the whispers weren't in the air. They were in his mind, threading through his thoughts. His knees buckled. He fell onto the Polaroids, hands pressed against the floor. The images pressed against his skin, warm, alive. For an instant, he felt himself being pulled, as though the photos were thin membranes, and he could slip through. "No," he gasped. "No, I can't." June's voice echoed from the window. "You already have." The room collapsed inward. Not literally, but his perception folded, stretched, cracked. One heartbeat, he was in his apartment, staring at peeling wallpaper. The next, he was in Darrenville, standing in the town square. Then back again. Then the diner. The motel. His car. His apartment. Reality shuffled like a deck of cards. His scream fractured into silence. And then stillness. Ethan blinked. He was seated in the diner booth, a cup of coffee steaming before him. The neon sign buzzed faintly outside the window. June sat across from him, her face calm, her smile gentle. "See," she whispered, "you're whole now." His hands trembled around the coffee cup. "Am I alive?" June tilted her head. "You exist. Isn't that enough?" The old man slid into the booth beside him. "Took me years to stop asking that. You'll learn. The questions don't matter here." Ethan's gaze drifted toward the window. Outside, the streets lay still. The fountain in the square remained frozen mid-splash. People sat on benches, their eyes vacant but content. And deep down, In some part of him he couldn't smother. Ethan knew that if anyone in the outside world thought of him, neighbors, coworkers, even strangers, they would hesitate. They would frown, searching their minds for his name, his face, and then shake their heads, deciding he had never really existed. He tried to remember his apartment, the city streets, the people he knew. The details slipped like water through his fingers. But Darrenville was sharp, clear, the smell of coffee, the hum of the neon, June's steady presence, the old man's quiet resignation. It was all he could hold on to now. He lowered his gaze to the table. A Polaroid lay there, freshly printed, still warm. It showed him sitting in the booth, coffee in hand, eyes hollow. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to, because he knew this was who he was now. The town had remembered him, and that meant no one else ever would.